right, let's go ahead and get rolling. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. My name is Brittany, or Smash. Most folks call me Smash. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Congregational Engagement Manager at the Night Ministry. And this is an education session that we are trying to do now monthly called LampLight Lunches. I think we're supposed to call it like a luncheon. I think if you're having like a meeting, it's supposed to be luncheon, but that sounds fancy to me. So I named it lunches, and but we're not actually giving you food. But know that you can have as much food as you want on this call. Don't be afraid to eat or drink as needed. But we're really glad that you can join us today, and we are excited to learn a bit more about evictions, realizing that that's really important to our clients and the work that we do at the Night Ministry and just our community as a whole. And today we are joined by Philip Devon. He is the eviction specialist at Metropolitan Tenants Organization. Thanks so much for joining us today, Philip.
Thank you for having me. And I know it's just a slight little thing, but it's eviction prevention specialist. I always correct people because when they say eviction specialist, I always think I sound like I'm out here evicting people, and that is not what I do.
That's a good call. I missed that whole most important word of your title, the eviction prevention specialist. Thanks so much, Philip. Philip, will you tell us first a little bit about Metropolitan Tenants Org and what you all do?
Sure. So Metropolitan Tenants Organization is a nonprofit that's been around since 1986. It came about really as a result of the passage of the Residential Landlord Tenant Ordinance. Some of you may have heard of this in Chicago. It's really the main law that sets out landlords and tenants' rights and responsibilities. We call it the RLTO. And that was born out of a multi-year community organizing effort that started in Rogers Park, spread south through Uptown, and eventually became a citywide push. And that resulted in Mayor Harold Washington passing the RLTO. And MTO really was created to educate and let people know about that law once it was created, and help empower tenants to exercise their rights. The RLTO, like many laws, unfortunately, is kind of a do-it-yourself law. So unfortunately, it's not like there's free lawyers or free ways to just exercise your rights or even know that you have these rights. So MTO, part of our job is to try and amplify what rights people do have, and certainly, of course, advocate to expand those rights. You know, MTO believes housing is a human right. So a lot of our advocacy work as well is around just creating stronger laws and things like that. And I'm sure we'll talk about some of those campaigns here today. And just an overview over those years, what we've done is really created three kind of programs. Our tenant stabilization program, I oversee the eviction prevention program. That's more of a one-on-one kind of direct service program due to the nature of the issue. And we probably serve about 100 to 200 people a month, and that includes just helping them document conditions, negotiate with landlords if necessary, get legal referrals. Another part of our tenant stabilization program is our hotline. I'll actually pop this number into the chat because it's good to have. Our hotline is open Monday through Friday from 1 to 4 or 1 to 5 p.m. I'm sorry. And we answer almost 10,000 calls a year on our hotline. I was telling Smash before we started that if you call 311, essentially, they usually will just route your call to our hotline, which is very illustrative of the problem we have with housing when a city with hundreds of thousands of renters relies on, a nonprofit with a handful of employees and volunteers to support them. So one, if you're ever interested in volunteering on the hotline, as if you don't have enough on your plates already, you can always call MTO and we'll gladly get you trained and get you on the hotline. But that's our tenant stabilization program, and that hotline really feeds our other two programs, our building organizing. Through the hotline, we find out about building organizing opportunities. We help people form tenant associations, and try to win bigger victories than just something they could get for themselves or fighting as an individual. You know, one big story we're kind of involved in right now, for example, is a building we're organizing in West Englewood. We had a big building meeting last night where the management created a new rule a month ago that just says, hey, no visitors allowed. We don't care. No one's allowed in or out if they don't live here. They hired armed security to enforce it. And we've been helping them organize. And this is a building full of people with young children, elderlies, disabled folks. And so, that's an example of a building organizing. And then, of course, our advocacy. We were disappointed. One example of things we would be pushing for is this emergency COVID-19 relief bill, which did not get pushed for a vote yesterday in the Senate before the state legislature adjourned. We fought really hard for that, and they said there was thousands and thousands of calls that were received. But unfortunately, that didn't pass. That would have sealed all eviction cases for anyone being evicted right now, would have stopped foreclosure filings, and also issued more rental assistance. So hopefully that'll happen in the spring. But that's essentially what MTO does. I know it's a lot, but please, Smash, stop me.
Oh, this is great. And I know you all have a ton going on all the time. You're doing incredible work with, like you said, a small group of staff and volunteers. So thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and all the work that you're doing. So you mentioned this COVID relief that unfortunately didn't go through yesterday. And I think one other thing that we've all kind of heard about is the eviction moratorium, but I'm not sure all of us really understand what that means and what it entails. So what is the eviction moratorium, or the moratoria? I think there are different ones. And is it helping renters right now?
Sure. So essentially, and we don't need to get too deep into the weeds of discussing the moratoria. There's essentially two. What they are just a temporary ban on the filing of and carrying out of evictions. Most people know, in Illinois and most places, an eviction means that you've lost a court case, the court has ordered you out, and then that eviction would be carried out by the sheriff. So those two things are being halted by these moratorium. There's a national moratorium, most have heard of the CDC moratorium, which was extended through January 31st of this year. That may be extended. Things have certainly changed. We thought that might not be extended. Things have changed a lot in Washington. We also think it might be extended again. The statewide moratorium, which is really what people here in Chicago are more concerned with, because it's also stronger, is extended essentially every 30 days. Right now, it's going to be in effect until February 6th. We expect Governor Pritzker to renew that for another 30 days. The law, that's as long as he can do it. So it happens every 30 days. And there are changes in the moratorium when it comes out or is reissued every 30 days. So for example, for the past several months, in order to be covered by this moratorium, again, which prevents a landlord from filing an eviction against you for non-payment of rent, you had to actually sign and send them a declaration form, under penalty of perjury, saying you lost hours, this, that. Now, currently, you do not have to do that. Everyone is covered if they're having problems paying rent. You cannot currently, right now in Illinois, have an eviction case filed for non-payment. You can, again, here's the exception to the moratorium in Illinois. It says that if someone is deemed a threat to the health and safety of the other tenants in the building or to the building itself, they could be evicted. Naturally, we've seen lots of landlords, take advantage of this and even kind of, gin up false allegations to get people into eviction court. And so we try to help minimize that. Naturally, being in court is never where you want to be, but especially in eviction court, if you're a tenant, because it's very landlord friendly. Just Monday, I was in eviction court, and there was a judge just actually said openly, I can't wait until the moratorium's over so we can get back to business. So, that shows you where the courts are at, or at least some of the judges in eviction court are at. So, what these moratoriums are doing is great. They are working to protect people. But what we're not doing, both as a legislature and even as a legal community, in my opinion, enough, is preparing for when the moratoriums eventually do end. And we've been saying this, I'm sure everyone's heard it a million times, but there will be an avalanche of evictions when the moratoria are lifted. And of course, there's other problems now. We've seen a huge influx in lockouts. In Chicago, it's considered an illegal lockout. This applies to any renter in the city of Chicago, no matter what the living situation is. If you rent in Chicago, it's illegal to lock someone out, meaning you can't change the locks, can't turn off any utilities like heat, electricity, gas, water, or do anything to interrupt their tenancy, like remove a door or a window. And these things all sound extreme, but they happen every day across the city. So if you ever run into anyone that has been, put out, they should call us right away, or call the Chicago Tenants Movement. And I will get the number. I don't have it in front of me, so I'll dig it up while we're talking. But the Chicago Tenants Movement is a coalition of volunteers made up of people from all different neighborhoods, all different organizations that actually have been responding to illegal lockouts throughout the city and helping tenants regain entry, end the lockout, get utilities cut back on, things like that. Because it is very hard to enforce. The police are responsible for enforcing lockouts. One, they never do their job and enforce or to end a lockout. And for obvious reasons, a lot of people don't want to call the police out in the first place. So that's kind of why the Chicago Tenants Movement has formed, to address this problem and help people get back into their homes. And it's really successful. We don't advertise a ton because there are moving parts that that are obvious going on certain people's properties, or helping them do things to get back in. But it works, and it's really something that I would encourage people to be a part of as well. If I know everyone just has so much time to volunteer, but Chicago Tenants Movement is doing great work. We've seen twice as many lockout calls since March 2020 than we did in the previous 2-year period. So in this past year, we've seen twice as many lockouts as we had in the previous 2 years. And that's because the courts are closed. So landlords are taking matters into their own hands, locking people out, and we're left kind of dealing with all of those issues on top of issues that we and renters deal with anyway. Repair problems didn't magically stop happening during coronavirus. So people have to deal with just kind of everyday problems that we've been helping guide them through as well.
Thank you. That's, yeah, I think probably learning about the fact that there are that many losses, new information for a lot of us. And I've, tried to read up on this a bit, and I know we're all concerned about this, about the, like you said, the avalanche of evictions that might be coming once the moratoria are lifted. Can you give us any idea of how we as individuals or organizations can work to make sure to support folks so that doesn't happen once the moratoria are lifted?
Yeah, so certainly on an individual basis, right now, the best thing that people can do is try to get some sort of agreement or payment plan in writing. And even if they can't get a landlord to agree to something, which is usually the case, just keep things in writing and continue to make their best efforts to pay whatever they can. If all someone can pay is $5, just do that and put that in writing, and that's going to help protect them. Because on a broader scale, what we're doing is pushing the state, and we think with this will happen, to get more money to actually provide lawyers for people when eviction courts reopen. And that's going to be huge because there are going to be a ton of people facing eviction. So, and then too, that leads to just pressure your legislators and your senators to pass these bills, and even your aldermen to vote again for a second round of rental assistance. There's a lot of money out there, and it's not going to the renters and even the homeowners that need it. So anytime that you talk to legislators or anyone in power, I would reiterate those demands that we need relief for working class tenants and property owners too, or else things are just going to get worse and worse.
Thank you. That's helpful. So I want to talk a little bit about just eviction in general. I think, when I started working at the night ministry, did a lot more research about eviction and housing and understand more now than I ever have, and have recently finished the book Evicted by Matthew Desmond, which I think for anyone who reads that is just kind of blown away by just the cycle of poverty and eviction that folks face. So would you tell us a little bit about the eviction process? And then maybe within that, tell us about how tenants fight or delay eviction.
Sure. So, and I'll kind of breeze through this. It's essentially, a handful of steps, the typical eviction process. So, if this was not in the midst of a pandemic, things are obviously different. But typically an eviction just means it starts with a termination notice. So your landlord has to give you a written notice terminating your tenancy. That's either a 5, a 10-day, or a 30-day notice. Now, it could also mean or require the landlord to give a 60, 90, or 120-day notice. I'll adjust that new law that was just passed momentarily, because that's very important to know. But generally, a 5-day notice means you didn't pay rent on time. A 10-day notice means that you violated a lease rule. And a 30-day notice would be given if they're just terminating or not renewing your lease at the end of the lease. If in that 5-day period you didn't pay rent, or in the 10 days you didn't fix the rule violation, or the 30 days you didn't move out, then they would file an eviction complaint. And that's when they actually go to court. Your written notice is expired. They can file the documents to start the case. You then would go through what's called service of summons. A copy of the eviction lawsuit and a copy of a summons saying that you need to go to court would be delivered to you. First, a sheriff would attempt, and then they can hire someone to do that. Once you're served, then the court proceeding would begin. That would be in the summons and the complaint that you received, and then the tenant would go through the process of a trial. Now, in eviction court, it's not like on TV. Lawyers Committee for Better Housing did a study a couple of years ago. The average eviction trial, and I'm not misspeaking, trial, where you're supposed to present evidence, both sides hear the other argument, they can cross it, lasts 90 seconds. The average eviction trial lasts 90 seconds. So you can imagine how well a tenant can defend themselves in a minute and a half, especially when they're up against a judge that's friendly with the landlord and their attorney. Landlords usually have lawyers. So that means they usually lose. And when you lose, then you get an eviction order. That's, like any other court case, the judge orders a judgment in the landlord's favor, meaning you can be evicted. And then that order is delivered to the sheriff of Cook County, and only the sheriff of Cook County can enforce an eviction. So we talked about that before, but if anyone else removes property or a person, even with a valid eviction order, that's an illegal lockout. Only the Cook County sheriff can do that, and not CPD. We've run into a lot of cops, both on or off duty, doing a favor for a friend and trying to evict people, and that's also very illegal. That's the typical process. What tenants could do, depending on the strategy, if delay is the strategy and we know you're never going to be able to, make a payment plan or catch up on a payment plan if there was one, and delay is the strategy, first couple things I would always tell, and this is no matter what, if a tenant is, in eviction court, they should, one, demand a jury trial. It's going to give them more time. They should ask for a continuance. And this is the practical advice. Ask for a continuance and call MTO's hotline so that we can give them further guidance and actually try to connect them with an attorney. The judges will give tenants a continuance to seek legal counsel. And so they would want to, definitely ask for a jury trial, get a continuance to seek legal counsel. And also, backing up to the summons part, I tell tenants all the time, if you know that the landlord has filed, which you'll know because you can look it up, then don't answer the door for people you don't know and people that might have some papers for you, because as long as you haven't been served, the court case can't proceed. So one way to get a lot of time is to make sure you avoid being served. And that's one good strategy. And I think that kind of answers the overview of what, the process is. Right now, I'll just mention it because I mentioned the fair notice ordinance. This was just passed and became implemented in October of 2020. And this is important to know because what the fair notice ordinance says is that typically what has always been the law is, like I said, a 30-day notice to terminate your tenancy or not renew a lease. Same if you're on month to month, you don't have a written lease, 30-day notice. Now that's changed. Only if you've lived in an apartment for 6 months or less can you be given a 30-day notice. If you've lived in your apartment now for 6 months or more, or from 6 months to 3 years, your landlord is required to give you at least 60 days notice of termination. And that applies to rent increases or rule changes. So now they have to give 60-day notice if you've lived in there for more than 6 months. If you've lived in your apartment for more than 3 years, they have to give you 120 days notice of any termination or any rent increase or rule change. So that's something that's law now, but like the RLTO, a lot of people just don't know about. So, I've gotten calls. I talked to 2 people today who just got 30-day notices. Totally illegal. They're supposed to get 120-day notices at bare minimum under this new law. So that's important to remember. And people should always, practical advice, never throw away anything your landlord gives you. Documentation, you may want that later, save that. And any conversations people have with a landlord or manager, write them down afterwards so that you remember what was said and you have documentation of that. Really, if people get anything out of conversations about, tenants' rights, I always tell them, just remember, document everything. Even if it seems absurd or innocuous, tell people, write it down because it may come in handy later. So that's kind of that. I don't know. Do you have another question? I think I covered what I needed to cover.
Yeah, that was helpful to lay out the process like that. So once folks have been served an eviction notice, gone through kind of the whole court process, and have been removed or have kind of left themselves because they know they were going to be removed, what kind of typically happens to folks at that point? What type of resources are there? What do folks typically do? I know there's a broad range, right? There's, lots of different things can happen to lots of different folks. But if you could kind of give us an idea of some of the things you've heard.
Absolutely. So I'm doing 2 things just before I forget. One, I'm putting our contact form right in the chat. This is helpful for any tenant or potential tenant that might have a question at any hour of the day. We respond to that contact form within 24 hours. The reason I push that is because it asks some specific questions that we need to know before we can answer certain questions. We have to know about their tenancy a bit to know what laws apply. So that's a really good way to get advice online. And then just for all of you, don't post this on your website, but for your own personal, there's my email. Of course, if any of you have a question, just email me and we can talk, and you don't have to wait for a longer response. Now remind me, this is after someone's been evicted. Well, unfortunately, it's tough. We have set up some resources. We have some mutual aid networks that are based on the northwest, and then on the south and southwest sides that we'll direct tenants to. So if someone's been evicted, again, hotline number, have them call us or use this contact form to get to our eviction prevention program. And dealing with that question is why the eviction prevention program as it exists came about. This program's only about 1.5 years old, and we realized after dealing with evictions for so long that we've been completely reactive, and we haven't been proactive in dealing with them. So we want to get involved much earlier in the process than, oh, I got court summons, now I'm in court. We want people to call us when they're having trouble paying rent, or when they think they might even have a problem paying rent, or when there's a small repair problem before they withhold rent. call us and we'll help them document it and do things in a way that will protect them moving forward. So the best advice for us is, that we have is contact us and reach out at even the slightest inkling of a problem, or if you think there will be a problem, because we can help navigate it and create that, molehill from becoming a mountain, so to speak.
Thanks. You mentioned small repair problem, and I'm not sure how this works in Chicago, but is there often difficulty for tenants once they report a problem to landlords? Do landlords find ways then to move towards eviction? How does that process play out?
Sure. So one, the most important way to avoid that process, I'm sorry if you hear dogs rustling in the background. There's one that happens all the time. Retaliation is illegal. Of course, there's the law and then there's reality. So it's illegal, but it happens every day. So the way to protect yourself against retaliation is to document things. So going back to what I said about documentation, don't just ask the landlord, put it in writing. Only use text if the landlord actually responds to text. Only use email if the landlord actually responds to emails. This is because you need to be able to prove that you gave the landlord notice about a repair issue before you start withholding rent or taking other actions. And under the RLTO, there's several different options. I won't go into all of those, but you have the right to make repairs up to a certain amount if the landlord doesn't fix something. And you have the right to reduce your rent by a certain amount if the landlord doesn't fix things. But you only have that right if you've written a letter, put the law in there that you intend on exercising, and then given the landlord the requisite amount of time, usually 14 days, 24 hours for essential service issues like heat, electricity, or water. So that's what you do. You write a letter, take photographs, you send them with that letter. If it's a heat or essential service issue, you should call 311 and request an inspection as well. That just, helps add to, the, documentation that you got going on. And if it's bad enough, call the alderman's office. This is one of those things that seems kind of like, oh, really? But we call the alderman all the time and it actually gets some things done. But documentation, if there's a repair issue, document it. If they're a tenant here in Chicago, all the letters that I'm talking about could be accessed just by using squaredawaychicago.com. We built that site just to help renters. It will create those letters for them. They just put in their information, describe the issue, and then they can choose what they're going to do under the law, and it'll create that 24-hour notice or that a security deposit return demand that so many tenants want. All could be gotten from squaredawaychicago.com.
Awesome. That sounds like a great resource. We'll make sure all of our folks have that as well. Can you tell us a little bit about how an eviction will then affect a tenant's ability to find safe and stable housing in the future?
Yeah, well, it has a major detrimental effect, and I think I strayed away from answering that before. Which is why we have our program. We want to prevent even the filing of an eviction. As it stands right now in the state of Illinois, essentially the damage is done once the case is filed, because the way that landlords work is they do these searches when you apply for apartments, and essentially what they get generally is just a list of people who've been in eviction court or had a case filed against them. They don't even see whether you won or lost your case. So even if it was a bogus case, you had paid your rent or you beat the case, it's just going to say, oh, eviction, and they say, sorry, I don't want to rent to this person, and they can't, they can you straight away. So that filing is a huge issue. That's one of the advocacy campaigns we've been working on. A just cause eviction law that would, create rule, essentially have to have a reason to evict someone, not just, oh, I want to charge someone else that can pay me more. So support things like that, a just cause eviction law, which would include sealing records upon filing. But also, again, what tenants can do is try to contact us. Don't wait until the last moment, because if a tenant does have a case filed, we can either get them an attorney or prepare them to go in pro se for themselves and file a motion to get the case sealed. And they are oftentimes successful in that. It's tricky. There's a lot of stupid legalese you gotta, write up a motion and do, but we can help them with that. We have forms and all that. So again, the earlier someone with a potential issue can contact us, the more likely we are of being able to avoid that. Because, you can imagine what happens when a family is uprooted and suddenly all of their belongings are put out on the street by a sheriff. It's that's devastating, and then it's much more devastating if they now can't find another place to go live, and then start spending money on a hotel like so many have to do in a pinch, and now they're in such a financial hole. They either start losing jobs, it just goes downhill. We don't think we have to go through the all the issues that an eviction creates, but it not only destabilizes that family but the community they lived in. So it's terrible.
Hmm. Thank you. Is it so are landlords able then to deny people housing because they've had previous evictions?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer, yes, they can, and that's something that would be included in a just cause eviction law, and in a way was even kind of included in SB 3066, the state package that was shot down yesterday by the Illinois Senate, that would seal cases upon filing and keep them sealed unless the tenant lost at trial, at fault. But yeah, right now they can file, then landlords can do whatever they want essentially, and they do it all the time.
Yeah, it's enraging, I'm sure, for you to have to work with so many folks who are just up against a whole lot of money and a whole lot of power, and have to kind of go through so many steps and barriers just to survive. So it seems overwhelming, right? Probably to those of us as well who are just learning about the process. You've already mentioned some things that folks can do individually or by supporting organizations. But could you kind of maybe just give us a succinct list of how people can support tenants' rights?
Oh, well, sure. I wish I would have thought to make a really succinct list before this.
It doesn't have to be like super succinct or
But
even succinct. Just go for it.
well, one, I would support some current campaigns. Anytime you talk to a legislator, of both, on a city level, state level, and the first and really one very important one is lifting the ban on rent control. I'm throwing these in the chat. Lift the Ban is a really active coalition of people trying to overturn Illinois' archaic prohibition on rent control. Unlike, it's outlawed. That's how landlord friendly the field is here. They managed to lobby Springfield to outlaw rent control in Illinois. So first step is repealing that. So please support that. Pritzker could do it, but he doesn't have enough political pressure. But he ran on that. He ran on lifting the ban on rent control, just like Lightfoot ran on a lot of housing things and support for teachers that never materialized. I'd argue it was the opposite. But push legislators to lift the ban and also support just cause eviction. We almost have a bill before City Council in Chicago, and as well as a sister bill that would be going in front of the state. And then one other campaign that we're working on is PASH. It's called a proactive inspection system. And that really would, we don't talk much about this, and it's like the least sexy campaign ever, I understand. But if we had a system of regular proactive inspections, we would not have the dilapidated housing stock that we currently have that requires tenants to either live with, deteriorating ceilings or find a new place to live. And so with proactive inspections, we could really avoid a lot of the problems we've talked about today. People reducing rent, eventually getting retaliated against, being evicted by the likes of Pangea and others who do this on a regular basis, and really use evictions as a mean to collect rent over and over. And so those are the things right now that we can do to protect tenants' rights. And also, I'm just going to add, for something very current, push state legislators to support and pass SB 3066, it was. That's called the COVID-19 Emergency Housing Bill, or Emergency Housing Act. And that should have been passed, could have been passed, but didn't quite have the political will. So those are some things I would do. And also look into Chicago Tenants Movement. For those of you, I would just suggest do like baby steps, follow them on Twitter. I don't know, maybe follow them on Instagram. They're hip. They do Instagram now. We post all the actions we're doing. We'll post, things that are safe to post, but we'll post actions and a lot of volunteer opportunities. If you want to help, somebody get back into their house, or we do a lot of calling campaigns to landlords to make repairs and do other things. So just following MTO on Twitter will kind of keep you in the loop, and that's our Twitter handle @tenantsrights. So those are the ways. I'll just keep going on. Someone has to stop me, but I'll stop there.
Those are great ways. And you mentioned Pangea, Philip. For folks that don't know, Pangea is a corporate landlord who is the biggest evictor in Chicago. And the Chicago Reader has been doing some really intensive work, some journalism work around Pangea. And I saw this on MTO's Facebook page. Yep. I'm not as hip as the young people. I'm still on the Facebook. So I posted that there. That's a really interesting, it's their latest article about Pangea, and it's about their corporate culture of racism on top of the fact that they evict thousands of people every year. I don't really know the number. Do you know, Philip, how many people they evict every year?
I'm not sure how many they evict, but there are 25,000 evictions filed in Cook County every year. And Pangea has more than any other landlord, and Pangea also gets more money from CHA through Section 8 voucher payments than any other landlord in Cook County. And so what they do is actually neglect to make repairs, and then the tenant will either stop paying rent or complain enough to where Pangea now has a legal position to evict them. They'll do that, continue collecting rent, and move someone else in there. So what they do is use eviction as a way to not make repairs, but to continue to collect rent money. So if you just look up Pangea and slumlord, you'll find a lot of articles. And so keep your eye out for that, because we're kind of working on a campaign to take them head on.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I think it's important for us to know kind of what's going on in our city and who the players are, and where the power and the money is. That will help us figure out then how to respond. I want to give other folks now.
And just one more thing, and I would always recommend, since we're talking about pressuring officials, definitely recommend always bringing things like this up to Tom Tunney and James Kappelman, who are not the most housing friendly folks, or certainly, like the mayor, claim to be very housing friendly and then constantly do things that both criminalize the houseless or create situations where people become homeless. They're both, they're both gentrifiers that do not support most of the campaigns I've just listed, and they need to be pressured by folks like myself that live in their ward. And I forget someone else I know mentioned being in Lakeview East. So please, when you do talk to them, mention these campaigns and tell them to do what their constituents actually need.
Awesome, thank you. I have a feeling a few of us on this call are at one of those two wards, so that is helpful to know. I want to open it up to everyone else now. If you have a question for Philip, Feel free to unmute yourself or to type one out in the chat. What questions do you have about eviction or what you've heard today?
Hi, this is Shada. This was super helpful. I just wanted to find out a little bit more about volunteer opportunities with the Tenants Rights Organization and like how you guys, so I'm an attorney, I work for McDonald's actually, and we do a lot of pro bono work. So I was just curious if you guys have partnerships with companies where attorneys can volunteer with you guys. And if you have a little more information about that, I would love to take that back or even get involved personally.
I'm muted. So I'm unmuted now. Shada, thank you for that wonderful question. We would love to get you plugged in. If you, one, we have a lot of relationships with private attorneys. It also sounds like you might benefit more from me connecting you with our partner organization, Lawyers Committee for Better Housing, and
Okay.
being plugged in with their pro bono program, which
Okay.
also kind of feeds eviction prevention clients that we work with right into their representation. And they have a whole host of pro bono attorneys in kind of a pipeline or a hopper that are, taking cases when they can. But we could talk more one-on-one about that, and I can connect you with LCB.
Perfect. Yeah, that would be great. I just feel like with the increase that you just mentioned, I can imagine that there's just going to be a lot of support needed.
Absolutely. And one thing that's needed, that I've been urging, I'm also an attorney in private practice, and one thing I've been urging, other lawyers to do is get involved, because there's a lot people can do without ever having to go to eviction court or have any experience in eviction court, especially just with a lot of pre-litigation, negotiations, some letter writing, just getting on a phone with the landlord often as an attorney has helped us, avoid, cases from having to actually be litigated. So we need those folks.
Perfect. Well, I will reach out to you.
Thank you so much. Of course.
Awesome. I love when folks get connected. Anybody else have questions?
Hey, Philip. This might be a little bit off base, but I wanted to at least throw it out there. So I just moved to Chicago recently. I am originally from, or was previously in Kansas City, and have like a lot of my sphere of influence and work with like social justice causes like this. A lot of people that are like close to me are in those areas. Do you know if like how much of the information that you shared around like the tips and kind of like the information that's kind of like important for people to know, how much of that might be relatable on like a national scale, or like how specific it is to Illinois, I guess? Any insight around that?
Sure. So the general tips and really the overarching themes, the most important things, which are document everything, put it all in writing. That's rule 1, 2, and 3, essentially, if we're going to boil it down to tips, is document everything. And then contact someone that's in the housing field as soon as possible. Don't wait until the problem has, become worse. Address it right head on. So yes, all those things are applicable nationwide, in other states. Document, take photographs, and then, write a letter. And, after you've researched if there's a local law there, like the RLTO in Chicago, that has some specifics. If not, then just write a letter and demand that they fix the whatever it is, because it's a violation of your lease. So definitely generally applicable, but I would just encourage people to look for and look up any local ordinances or state laws that might apply before they do take that action. But it's always document and write a letter. It can't hurt to write a demand. And if you don't cite the right law, if you're doing step 2 and following up with a housing org or an attorney, they'll make sure that you get that done. And I would encourage the country to look at Kansas City and what they're doing right now. You know, they're actually have taken it a step further than a lot of us, and they're shutting down eviction courts, both physically and digitally, in the last couple of months, and it's been very inspiring. So shout out to your friends in Kansas City.
Excellent. Anybody else have any questions? All right. Well, Philip, thank you so much. I know I learned a ton. I think everybody else learned a ton. This was really helpful. I'm looking forward to us continuing to work together, and I'm glad we can continue to make all of these connections with those of us throughout Chicago who are trying to work to make things more livable for folks in our community. So thank you so much for joining us.
Very happy to join you guys. Thank you so much. And please, you know, copy down my email if you haven't already. It's in the chat, and reach out if you have any questions or any of your clients have needs that I may be able to help with.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And everyone, we hope you can join us monthly. We're in the process of getting the next about 6 conversations scheduled out. So if you have any ideas or want to see us talk about any particular issues, feel free to shoot me an email. This Zoom came from my email, so you should have that in your inbox. But thank you, everyone. Be well and happy MLK weekend. See you next time.
Thank you.